Welcome everyone to the Community IT Innovators webinar series. Today we're going to be talking about IT security best practices. Just a few tips before we get started. We encourage you all to ask questions, and please post the questions via chat. We'll also be asking you a few poll questions during the webinar, so that would be great if you can participate. If possible, avoid multitasking. And finally, we will be sharing the PowerPoint and the recording with you afterward, so just to let you know that. A little bit about Community IT. We partner with nonprofits in the DC, Baltimore area, and we help them with their strategic and day-to-day IT challenges. The presenters we have today are Steve Longenecker and Mark Kraemer, and I will go ahead and hand it over to them.
Thanks, Roshni. This is Steve. Today's agenda is obviously IT security. We'll start out by talking about sort of the definitions of IT security, or the definition of IT security for the purposes of this presentation. Mark will talk about organizational philosophy and attitude regarding IT security. Then Mark will talk about organizational structures. We'll share the stage going through some various security technologies. And then Mark will talk about end-user responsibility and training for IT security. If there's time, we'll share some of our IT security stories. We've talked to some of our colleagues, collected a few stories. I don't know if there'll be time or not, but if there is, we have a slide for that. And finally, of course, we'll leave some time at the end for questions. I wanted to mention or make sure that we understand that that this presentation is sort of focused on sort of a baseline view of IT security. Discussing it with staff we had a staff meeting on Tuesday where we presented a sort of a dry run of this and to our team, and it was really fun to get their feedback. And someone on the team talked about the house metaphor, that if you have a house that you don't want, there's definite levels of security you can have for that. And we're not talking about making your house absolutely secure, absolutely proof of all attempts to get into the house. But we are talking about basic things like locking the front door, closing the windows before you leave, turning a porch light on, that kind of a thing. And then another colleague actually said, well, it's not quite like a house, because unlike a house, there's the big bad internet's out there, and people are coming up to your front door and seeing if it's unlocked literally every 2 minutes in the neighborhood you live in. So anyway, we'll move on from that. To get us started, we have 2 poll questions. Our first question is just to get a sense of how big your organization is. So the question that you'll see, I think, on your screen, I don't see on mine, but it's how many staff are in your organization. And the second question is, what's the second question? Okay. Okay. Oh, so we're leaving that poll open. We'll get the second question in a minute. I'll start the big picture section. I remember the second question. The second question that you'll see in a little bit, but we got to get the data on the first poll. The second poll question we'll get in a few minutes. So the big picture, all of our pictures, and there aren't many, but all of our pictures are from the commons area of Wikimedia, Wikipedia, and we certainly appreciate that tool. I did a search for the big picture and couldn't find anything. It was a lousy search term. Then I looked for security and found lots of uncopyrighted pictures of police officers and badges and so forth. And then I found that there was a subcategory called security fences. This is from that. This is a security fence. And then I noticed there's a great vista behind it. This is a good big picture thing. So the big picture is the definition time. What are we hoping for when we say we want our network to be secure? There's a number of different definitions, and it's not that one is correct or incorrect. You know, you could be talking about that you don't want to have any interruptions to your IT operations. The IT systems support your organization's operations probably from one end to the end, from the beginning to the end, and interruption to that is obviously something you want to resist and not have. That's not what we mean by security, but obviously that could be, thinking about a secure network, would be having redundant systems and failover and stuff. That's an expansive view of it. A more narrow view, but still not as narrow as we're going to be focused on today, is that there's no data loss. And that's where you're thinking about backups. If you were following that definition of security, then accidental deletion of a file by an end user, that's you know, acting properly and not doing anything that they didn't mean. You know, it was an accident. But that would be covered by this, and we're not talking about that. This is more like sort of the definition, that there's no inappropriate use of IT resources. The Wikipedia definition that I found when I did look for it there that works for us is that IT security means preventing unauthorized access, misuse, modification, or denial of IT resources. So here's where we get our second poll question. Sorry, I'm getting closer to the phone, to the microphone, so you can hear me. So here's our second poll question, which is, what is your organization's biggest IT security challenge? So while that's coming up for you, I'll continue on with some of our own examples of this kind of threats that would be for this. So a denial of service attack prevents access to our organization's website for 6 hours. That's covered by our definition of security today. Malware causes half my desktop to participate in a bot army. Hopefully neither of these two things is happening to any of you guys recently anyway. Of course, the second one there, you may not even know. Interns are reading the personnel files of veteran staff members. This speaks to the unauthorized access, even though they're people that are on your team and part of things, but they are in places they shouldn't be. And finally, the office manager is using your organization's fantastic internet connection to download copyrighted movies so he or she can burn them to DVD and watch them at home. These will all be examples of security threats. The poll questions, the answers to the poll that we've gotten so far indicate that the biggest concern, and of course these aren't mutually exclusive because you could check more than one, but viruses, 42% of the respondents are saying viruses is one of the biggest challenges facing their IT security. Hackers is a close second at 38%. And then mobile device leakage and unauthorized access to files were mentioned as challenges by about a fourth of the respondents, and then other gets 35%. We were only allowed to have 5 choices for these poll questions by the tools that we were using. So sorry we couldn't list more. I would love to unpack what other means. So this is now Mark's turn to start talking.
Hello, this is Mark. One of the things that you should really think about with IT security is that it's not just a few tools that you put in place. It really has to come as an organizational philosophy and attitude. We have to plan for this as an organization. If it doesn't come from the top down and have everyone's participation, it's not going to be effective. So one of the big questions now is, what is your organizational balance between security, accessibility, and cost? Most of the clients at Community IT are not targets of malicious hackers explicitly, at least not personally directed targets, someone coming up and trying to get into your organization specifically. Now, you have valuable resources such as a fast internet connection and a mail server that hackers are generally happy to exploit. So to say that they're not really so much out to get you specifically as they are out to get everyone, and that we have to take precautions against these. And that's what most security experts sort of anecdotally say, is that it's these common exploits if we look in our logs, we're constantly being pinged. Hackers are always checking, and more honestly, bots, sort of automated systems, are looking for the holes in our networks. And they're not sophisticated, so our basic protections, such as good passwords, are often enough to deter most of the intrusions, but not all. So how do you assess your organization's risk? First question I'd ask is, what is your mission? Who do you serve? Who are your clients? Where's your mission directed? What types of data do you have? How many users? And also, what is your existing security infrastructure? For these, depending on what you do, this will determine both your risk and how you need to protect it. For example, organizations that work with sensitive financial data or credit cards will have different requirements. Organizations that work with medical data especially, there's numerous government regulations that will determine some basic protections that you must have in place. It also, of course, will depend on your existing infrastructure. If you already have systems in place, then you may not need as much work to do, and it may be more maintenance level. Another important question is, what are your accessibility requirements? Where do your users do most of their work? Do they use their own devices? Are these company-issued devices? Are these laptops outside of your network of which you have control? And do they need remote access to your systems? And what level of access do they need? The most secure system, of course, is one that's not even on the internet, but that's not terribly practical for most of the types of work that our clients do. And so we have to strike this balance. And then financially, of course, what is the cost of your security? Again, what is required by law or credentialing organizations? One of the groups that I've run into at a previous client is PCI compliance for handling credit card processing. And those have some often very stringent requirements that may be unfamiliar to most people. Again, the state of your current network. And of course, we must take into account your IT budget. And I want to stress that it is possible to overbuy security, and that a careful analysis is really important because you don't want to have too convoluted of a system based on your needs.
I'll add something there, Mark. I think something else that we sometimes see is in terms of people think we need to think about return on investment with IT security spending. So sometimes going back to that house analogy, people sometimes might invest in some nice security technology, and it would be metaphorically, putting good bars on all the windows, and that seems like a good idea because anybody knows that a really determined burglar can get in through your windows and break the windows and get in. So that's great. They invested on all these bars, but because their password policy is really, which would cost very little to improve that. Their password policy is really not up to snuff and not up to best practices. The metaphorical analogy there then is that they have good bars on all their windows. They're really strong. It would, you would be amazed how it's rated for super, super strong, but the door is still unlocked. The front door is still unlocked because passwords are so easy to obtain or get through. So how you spend your money is a critical piece of that.
Very true. Thank you, Steve. So the next sort of, after you've evaluated what you need, we also have to take into account what I consider organizational structures. How is your organization set up to handle security? And I start with security culture. Does your organization think about security? Is this something that's on the minds of both your users and your administration? Are users accountable for their actions? If someone accesses files that they shouldn't, what happens? And also on this level, do stakeholders understand what security breaches can mean for the mission? For example, if your Exchange server is being used to send spam, that can have your email blocked. If credit card data goes missing, just look at the news on every day. We see major data breaches where thousands of credit card numbers are stolen and used for data theft. So it can impact both your brand, but also very much individual. Many of us have had our own run-ins with identity theft, and that's very scary, time-consuming, and expensive. So these are some very real threats that you need to carry through to your users so that they can understand that this isn't just something, oh, yeah, protect our passwords, yeah. It's really more than that. It really has tangible impact on people. My next one, and this is a big one for me, is that someone at your organization needs to own security. And we have a poll question here. So who owns it at your company? And I'll ask you this as a poll question. Is it your office manager? Is it your HR person? Your CFO? I think there's the poll question. So who's responsible for IT security in your organization? And yeah, so is the poll open? Now, so far, let me see as these results come in. Now, every one of our clients is different. The client I work primarily with has a dedicated IT manager. Smaller organizations, though, often just have one person in the office who handles it, be it an administrator. Oftentimes, it comes down to office manager or operations. And right now, currently, 46% of our attendees right now have a chief technology officer, which is very impressive. I really want to stress, if you don't know who this person is, it's time to find out. Because changes will not happen, and we can make policy changes, but unless there's someone there to have the follow-through, it's not going to be effective. Someone sort of has to lead the camp to make sure that changes get implemented and it's followed up on. We need policies for our end users. An appropriate use policy is sort of standard fare. And what I mean by appropriate use is what your users are allowed to do with your company resources. So what websites are they allowed to access? How are they allowed to use email on their cell phones, which will come up again shortly? We must have a password policy. It's one of the most basics. Community IT recommends 8 or more characters. It must be complex, using numbers, letters, capital letters. And we also recommend changing frequently, usually around every 90 days. There's no absolute with this, and you'll have to make some allowances based on your organization, but you cannot escape having a password policy. And I would also add prohibiting users from storing passwords on pieces of paper that are easily accessible, so physical security for your password. And the old standby for this is the janitor who walks by, pulls up the password off of your desk, logs in, and has access to your data. Also, bring your own device, BYOD, and bring your own application, BYOA. Now, this is still very much in flux in our field. We're continually figuring out how to handle these devices. The most common access through these devices is email. The BYOA, bring your own application, though, has some other very interesting ramifications, because if a user adds, for example, an insecure program on their cell phone in which they're accessing your email, that could be a direct in. A lot of times, users are looking for legitimate applications, such as Dropbox, to fill a very specific purpose, but your organization needs to take these into account and create policies for them. You also need policies at the IT department level. And again, these hopefully should be pretty much transparent to your users. And again, the more complex your network, the more advanced these policies will probably need to be, the more scrutiny that's required. We must have a patching policy. Our vendors are continually updating our software for security as they're under attack. Everything from Windows on down to the various sub-applications like Flash and Java. So you have to have a policy to make sure this gets done, and someone needs to go in and make sure it's happening. Even if you're bringing in an outside company, these things need to happen. Data retention policies. How you store your data and how long you keep it for. We have, for example, one client that, as a matter of policy, deletes all of their email after 28 days. And this is to avoid, what's the word I'm looking for, searches, discovery in legal proceedings. And so that's their policy, and they have it, and they follow it. That may not be appropriate for your organization, but we should consider this. And lastly, identity and access management. Who creates user accounts and gives users permission to what files? And then again at the end, when a user leaves the company, who removes their permissions, closes their account, and takes care of their data. And we often find that this is really tied tightly to human resources policy. And so we would recommend that you take a look at it from that side. Steve?
Yeah, I can say, well, when we say who is responsible for making, like, giving users access to certain things, we don't mean your IT staff. It could be that it's one of our technicians who's actually doing the changes to permissions on a folder so that a user has access to a folder that they didn't have access to before. Fine, that's a technician's job to make those changes on a server. We're talking more about who has the authority to ask for that change to be made. So when our technicians are at one of our clients, the request to have the finance folder be available to this user, if that request comes from the user directly, we as technicians need to ask, well, is that request an authorized request? And that's where the policy needs to come from. So oftentimes it's part of onboarding a new staff person is for HR to fill out a form and say this person is a member of the finance team, this person's a member of the HR team, and they should have access to the folders that these people have access to, the systems that these people have access to. But it's, particularly with small organizations, it can get very informal. And I think the smaller you are, the less this needs to be all laid out in the strictest sense of like a formal policy. But I think there needs to be understanding throughout the organization about who can authorize these kinds of things.
All right.
This is my slide. We weren't sure where to put this slide, and maybe it doesn't fit anywhere, but that when we're thinking about policies, we do think about sort of three things that are in balance with each other: confidentiality, integrity, and availability. And they are not they're going too far in one direction definitely limits what you can do with another direction. So it's just something that you will see when you read about IT security in general. That we can sort of, and there's some people try to add other things to this, make this triangle into a square, or add a couple things and make it into a circle. But these are things that if you're talking about a particular folder, keeping it HR personnel materials, that needs to be kept confidential. That's very important. But you need it to be available to the people who need to have access to it, or they can't do their jobs as HR, as your HR department. And certainly, throughout that, you need to think about it having integrity. You don't want files to be changed, someone to go in and change their annual performance review, or someone else's annual performance review. I mean, you've got to know that these files are being, that the data in them is being maintained the way it's supposed to be. So I put this slide in here. It could be that it fit better somewhere else, but it is something sort of that, whether or not it's expressed formally, is underlying decisions that are being made about these policies. They can't hear us, huh? I don't know why. This phone usually picks up things well. Did you want us to call in with that?
Go ahead, and I'll do that.
Okay, all right. Our next section is maybe the section that people are tuning in for. I don't know. Security technology. We don't want to undervalue. We don't want to undervalue all the policies, though. And it was not an accident that we talked about policy stuff first and structures first. Because as Mark said, you can invest a lot of money in technology and not get anywhere in terms of your overall IT security if you don't have structures in place to, structures in terms of people to keep things going. So some of our technologies. Patching and monitoring is the first thing I want to mention. It's probably, if you want to talk, password policy is probably the top thing, but shortly after that is this patching and monitoring. You can do a lot of other stuff with fancy security things, and if you're not keeping your operating system patched, it's not going to matter, because particularly with Windows, but Java's been in the news a lot. That it is common knowledge that people are constantly finding holes in the security of the Windows operating systems. Microsoft, whether you want to argue that they're delivering their products, before they're ready, I don't know. It could just be the nature of how hard it is to build a modern operating system. To Microsoft's credit, they're very good about delivering patches, and but you got to make sure that you then use those patches. So there's a Patch Tuesday, and that's become part of the IT support lexicon. Is that there's a Tuesday every month that Microsoft releases most of their patches, and we want to shortly after that add those patches to our desktops and servers. There's third-party patching. That's what I just mentioned, how Java exploits have recently been in the news a lot, and there's been a flurry of Java updates that have been coming out. Each update fixes something, and then someone finds that it didn't quite fix it, so another update comes out a week later. And if you're running an unupdated Java from 3 months ago, you're probably have a very vulnerable system. So we have centralized patching now at Community IT. It's something that we have sort of been beta testing with our clients, and will be something that's a full, service that's fully available to our clients very shortly. Some of the things that we had to consider when we rolled out our patching system, we do it through our monitoring agents. Is how do we do it in terms of Windows and third-party patches? Do we do it during the day? Do we do it during the night? If it's during the day, now we're getting feedback loop. Should I mute over here?
Turn it off.
Hang it up?
Yes.
Okay.
Okay.
Now we're switching phones. I hope that you can hear me better on this one. Oops. Sorry about that. I hit the escape button. No, go to it. I don't think I lost anything. Okay. Fortunately, let us know if there's problems. Do we force reboot? Because, lots of users keep their computers open for days on end and have billions of applications open, and they feel like it's a big burden to their productivity to have to reboot a computer. But some patches require a reboot. So how you handle that? We actually have sort of two options that we're going to be rolling out to our clients. Sort of the forced reboot, where you know you're going to get the patch right away, and then we have the sort of soft rollout, where the patches are delivered and they're put on the computers, but the reboot, there may be a nice reminder that clicks up for a user, and they can dismiss it a couple days in a row, and it's not for like a week that actually they're warned that their computer will be rebooted that night, whether they want it to or not. So those are different approaches. Monitoring sort of a separate thing, but it is something that you want to do, and it is nice that, if your service provider can do it in a centralized way. There's monitoring for all sorts of things, and we can take the more expansive view of security that we were talking about, the definition, where it's more than just the unauthorized access or deletion, blah, 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 of your data. Things like keeping your monitoring can notify you if a disk fails, and that's useful. But monitoring is also part of the narrow view of security, that there's lots and lots of attempts at accessing one of your servers, and that's filling up your event log. It would be nice if in some centralized way somebody noticed that and could at least make a decision about what kind of corrective action to take, if any. So we do that for our clients, and we have invested a fair amount of time in getting that monitoring to a place where the triggers are in the right place. That it's not triggering on every little thing, which creates so much noise that you can't see the actual problems because everything's triggering. But then the other issue is that you don't want to have the triggers be so unsensitive that even big things aren't noted. So we have it in a pretty good place now, and I hope, and if you are not a community IT client, we certainly encourage you to have centralized monitoring, and want you to recognize that setting that kind of thing up, getting that balance on alerts and triggers can be a challenge.
All right, Windows, Microsoft helpfully includes some many very good security tools that are, for most IT folks are sort of considered basic, but they really are critical. The first being NTFS permissions, new technology file system, which was new, 20 years ago? But it's still sort of the go-to standard. And this helps us, gives us very fine-grained control over who has access to what. And so especially with what we talked about where we limit users having access to various files and folders, this is the mechanism through which that happens. Windows UAC, which is the user account control, first introduced in Windows Vista, really gives us a little bit more security in terms of installing and running programs. And so the little annoying pop-up, do you really want to install this program, is triggered by UAC. And while over the years some users have found it to be annoying, it really is an essential tool for us that keeps malicious software necessarily from taking over. The event logs,
although it can't count on it.
That's true. It's not, none of these are foolproof, but it's certainly one more layer of defense. This is the cheap little window lock, you might say. But if you unlock the window, they can still walk in. Event logs are sort of the standard that help us figure out where and when intrusions are happening. Host-level firewalls, which by that I usually mean the Windows firewall. This is especially critical when for laptop users who are not on your immediate network that you don't have as much control over. Inside the network, because you're presumably behind a good firewall, which Steve will mention in a few moments, probably less critical, but it's still one more tool.
Mark, we got a question. What is UAC?
UAC is user account control.
It's the annoying pop-up that you get that just says, hey, are you sure you want to do this when you start installing some applet or something, and you think it's crazy because, of course, you're the one who just clicked install, so why is it asking you again? Or maybe it requires administrative privileges to install. It asks you for a password. It asks you to click OK if you have administrative privileges. The value of it is that if it's not you, the computer doesn't necessarily know that you're the one who initiated the install when you double-clicked on the install file. The computer doesn't necessarily see that as any different than when clicking on something on the internet starts to try to install things. You didn't know when you clicked on that link on the internet that you were going to be installing something, because it didn't say that. You just thought you were going to a new web page or something. You click on something, and all of a sudden the computer starts trying, an install process starts. And at that point, you're grateful that the UAC pops up and says, are you sure you want to install this? Because then you can say no, since you never intended it. So that's the UAC.
So we have another question from Andy Weaver. Can UAC be turned off for just one specific program?
I don't know the answer to that.
I don't either, but we should certainly find out. I'm not sure that it really can. There are levels of permissions. But usually you see it most often when you're actually installing something. That may be controllable at the group policy level, however, and exceptions could probably be added there.
And another question from Jennifer. Please explain what NTFS is.
NTFS is the new technology file system, which
that's a bad name since it's not new anymore.
Yeah, which was rolled out many years ago. This is, I think most simply put, file permissions are what allows users to access which files. So when you go into a folder, say you're trying to access the finance folder, but you haven't been given permission for that, you don't get in. And that's the structure that control some of that?
To the IT technician's eyes, what it looks like is you can change the properties of a folder or a file, and one of the properties of that folder or file are the NTFS permissions. And so you might say that the security group called HR has access to this folder, and you change that in the NTFS permissions, and then the HR security group is set up somewhere else, and that might have 3 or 4 staff members in it, and you list their user accounts in there. So when those people double-click on that folder in your file server, they get in. When someone who's not a member of that security double-clicks on that folder, they get a pop-up that says, I don't remember what the exact language is, you do not have access, or you are not authorized, or something like that. But Mark's right, you don't get in at that point. It's while we're poo-pooing it for being called new, it's not new. It is still a very significant tool in an IT security playbook. It's used all the time.
Now, I mentioned a moment ago group policy, and this comes up for 2 different things. What happens is group policy at the administrative levels from the server can enforce certain policies on the local computers. So that password policy we talked about as being so essential actually can happen via group policy. The same way with the screensaver lock, where you can tell all the computers on your network that they must lock after 20 minutes and then of inactivity, and the users have to type their password again. And I, again, want to hammer that the old line of if it's not physically secure, it's not secure. And so if you walk away from your computer and it's unlocked and someone can walk up, that can be a risk depending on your environment.
I want to say 2 things about this. One is the word policy here is a little confusing. So policy in this case is a technical term for a technical solution whereby certain password enforcement things are put into effect. So we make a group policy that says users have to change their passwords after 90 days. And that's a group policy, and that's a technical thing a switch that you put on the server that makes that happen. So after 90 days or a week before 90 days, you get a pop-up when you log in that says your password's about to expire. Do you want to change it now? That's a technical thing. Then there's the policy about passwords that's set at the organizational level. That's a written down policy or a discussed among leadership policy, an agreed upon policy that says we want our users to change their passwords every 90 days. That's the old-fashioned kind of policy. That comes first. The technical implementation is kind of a minor thing. Now, sometimes it's hard to implement it's hard to enforce technically certain policies, but password enforcement is not. So realizing that we need to keep moving along here, do we not? Okay. Screensavers are kind of most important probably for people who are running HR or finance systems. If the HR person gets up to go get a cup of coffee and their computer is out where anybody can see the screen, it sure would be nice for someone. It's just so tempting to like sit down at their screen just for a quick second and see stuff that you're not supposed to see. Yeah. Talking about firewalls, we're going to start speeding up here. We recommend FortiGate firewalls. It's not because there are other models, other manufacturers that don't make very good firewalls. We recommend FortiGate. It seems to us to have been, they do a good job of balancing functionality and price points. Their firmware upgrades come out frequently. They support their products well, and we find that the build quality of the devices themselves, it's not that we've never had a lemon ever, but they're rare, and so we feel good about this manufacturer at this time. These bullet points are all over the map. So this is not necessarily any good structure. But just to mention that lots of times with firewalls, we focus on inbound traffic, on traffic from the outside coming in and trying to keep hackers out. And that's important. That's the most important thing. But what's sometimes overlooked is the value of limiting outgoing traffic. If you have desktops or servers that are compromised, they might start sending, for example, spam out all over the place. And your organization could get labeled as a spammer. There could be people who have unauthorized set up file sharing services on their desktops, so like LimeWire and that kind of thing. And LimeWire is actually pretty hard to block because they're always changing their ports, but blocking certain kinds of outgoing traffic so that it can't go out is useful. Limiting incoming traffic to a source address is sometimes can be done, and it's a good idea when it can be done. So if you have an email server on site, you may only allow email to come from your spam filtering host, not from just anywhere, but only from your spam filtering host, because you know that all of your emails should first go to that spam filtering host so they can check it for spam, and then they'll forward it on to you. And you don't want email traffic from anywhere else, so you block all email traffic except from that. Firewalls can provide VPN remote access. We recommend replacing them every 5 years. We had an argument about this on Tuesday when we presented this to our colleagues, but we're going to stick with that. Doesn't mean that you don't replace them more often if you need to, but after 5 years, we feel like these devices get old enough that you start asking for trouble. You need to size them appropriately, and we can certainly help you with that. It's not just the number of users and the size of your bandwidth. It's also firewalls can do other things like this VPN. Also, it's not on my slide here, but I should mention that you can do intrusion detection and protect against data leakage. We can, FortiGate have the capacity, for example, to check traffic for credit card numbers, and that can be useful. It's also important to maintain your firewall, and this means updating the firmware regularly, backing up the firewall configuration when you make changes to it, maintaining a support contract with the manufacturer, and removing policies when they're no longer in use. Finally, one last thing about firewalls. Lots of times we get requests from our clients. Can you tell us what this person was doing on the internet yesterday? And that's not a bad question under certain circumstances, but I just want to let you know that firewalls, FortiGates anyway, aren't able to do that out of the box anyway. There are products that do, and so proactively you can add those things to your network, asking, and then you can get the answer to those questions after you've done those.
All right, on to email filters, which I'm sure many of you are at least a little bit familiar with. At Community IT, we recommend using a hosted service. We provide McAfee as part of our standard service contracts. Many of you might be familiar with Postini, which is run by Google, which has seen better days, unfortunately, but was still the gold standard for quite a long time.
Well, they're discontinuing.
Yeah. Also, many of these mail filters offer mail continuity service because your email is first routed through their servers. If your mail server goes down, many of them are able to provide sort of a backup in case mail goes down. Oh, and there we go. Postini was great. One more note, too, on the hosted email filters is that, yes, Outlook does have a built-in mail filter, but it's not Outlook's great strength. It's sort of a Band-Aid approach, and we much prefer a professional service that is constantly maintaining and updating, and that is just sort of at the cutting edge. And there is McAfee SaaS email protection and continuity that we provide to our clients.
Desktop server antivirus software is a critical part of IT security. You must have it. You must maintain it. We recommend, at this point, I'd say we need enterprise solutions unless you have like an office that has just two or three people in it. An enterprise solution would include centralized management so that you can see the status, the definitions on all of the hosts that you're protecting with your antivirus software. And at this point, too, I think our clients are going towards cloud-based antivirus software. The big advantage there is that when you have a laptop that's traveling, where it's not on the network, you can still get updated definitions whenever it's online. In the old days, you'd have an antivirus server on your network, and then laptops would sometimes get out of date, and they certainly wouldn't be monitored very well when they were away. No solution's immune to the zero-day threat. Just everyone needs to understand that if you're an early adopter of the virus, and but unfortunately it's before definitions have been written to such a new virus, you're going to have problems. So every antivirus solution out there has people on the internet complaining about it, and sometimes I wonder if it's because people have their expectations are too high. We offer Viper antivirus to our clients. We like it. We think it's doing very well for our clients. There are other very good AVs. There are a number of good products out there, and I think they're probably all in some ways equal to each other. And AV software is no substitute for careful end user behavior. This is me too. Internet content filtering. This is popular in school and lab scenarios, and that's sort of the traditional idea that we're going to filter, what sites, websites, browsers can get to. We're going to stop people from getting to adult content sites. We're going to stop people from getting to hate speech sites, that kind of a thing. That makes a lot of sense. It's reasonable. They're not. People are generally not as concerned about that with adult staff that they have hired and trust. Although we do have certainly clients who have this traditional kind of content filtering in those settings. But I want to stress that content filtering doesn't have to just be that kind of filtering. You can also restrict filtering in terms of content filtering that doesn't talk about the content in terms of hate speech, but more the content in terms of certain kinds of files that are known to be bad files, like maybe certain kinds of executables that are associated with malware. Again, this is no substitute for good end user habits. So technology is only part of the solution.
All right, I'm going to just very quickly skim over file disk encryption because we're running out of time. Pretty much none of our clients use it at the enterprise level. It's simply not considered practical for that purpose, although we certainly see it at the local level. And there's certainly a risk involved that if the password goes missing, you must have a recovery system in place. And like any solution, it's certainly not foolproof. And single sign-on is also becoming more and more common as online services spin up. Hosted services, but it's still very much a work in progress. The nice advantage, though, is that when you can implement a single sign-on, it gives your organization much more control, and it becomes one password per user to manage rather than multiple passwords.
Two-factor authentication. Two-factor authentication is kind of coming into vogue now. The idea is that you have two separate authentication systems that must be navigated to gain access to a system or a resource. The famous example is the ATM machine. Everybody has a card that's just like a credit card they put into their ATM machine. They also have a 4-digit PIN. Neither one by itself seems super secure. People lose their wallets. I've lost my wallet before into the pieces of plastic you'd think would fall into people's hands and they could get money out of your ATMs. And also a 4-digit PIN. That's not by our standards for password complexity, and it's not 8 characters and complex like we were talking about before. It seems like you'd be able to hack it. The thing is that putting the two together has a multiplicative effect. The chances of someone getting your plastic and having your PIN, that's kind of low, or at least it's low except for some scary scenarios where you get kidnapped and whatever. So we'll move on. Google offers two-factor authentication now for its Gmail. You can have put an app on your phone that gives you a separate PIN code that goes with that changes every time you ask for it, or they can text you a PIN code that when you log in, you know your password, great, but then someone actually has to have physical control of your phone before they can get the second part of getting into Google, into Gmail. Just one, key fobs, which that's what that picture at the beginning of this section on software internet on IT security began with, all those little key fob pictures. Those have been replaced by soft tokens, which are on mobile phones. And I just want to mention that one concern about two-factor authentication is that you do want to make sure that the systems are kept separate. With everything getting on your phones these days, it comes down. Sometimes it comes to the point that if someone gets your phone, they get everything. And we all may feel that way sometimes. But if you have like cache credentials to a system on your phone, and that's where your soft token lives, someone may have access to everything just once they get your phone. Mobile device management is our last.
We should skip the question.
We should skip the question?
Yeah, we're about that.
Okay. This mobile device management does need to be considered because of what I just talked about. And invite you guys, it is something that we're going to be looking at in the fall at finding a service that we think we can roll out to our clients. We'll have to skip the section on that.
We'll unfortunately have to skip the section on end user responsibility today.
What we can do is go ahead and go through it quickly, and then whoever wants to stay for questions can stay a little bit longer.
Okay.
Okay.
That sounds good. So you want to do, all right, so safe email habits, I think, is yeah, go ahead. Let's launch the poll. And just which of these things which of these practices does your staff need to improve upon the most? Safe email habits, not opening that.
I can see the poll.
So. Okay.
We could talk about some of these.
Yeah. Making good passwords, as we talked about, browsing habits. Facebook can be dangerous, folks. It's become a frequent attack vector in recent years.
And safe password habits, we can enforce that through policies in some ways. We can force you to change your password regularly. But we can't stop you from writing it on a Post-it note and putting it in your desk drawer, or at least if we don't know about that, we can't stop it.
Well,
or from sharing it with your colleagues, because if I'm sick, I want you to know what my password is.
And there are other services that users may have accounts for business purposes, be it Dropbox or what have you, that we can't enforce from our network.
That's true. Email is the obvious one, but it continues to be a concern if someone sends an email that looks like a safe one. It looks like it's from your bank, and they want you to confirm some account information, and you click on it. So safe password habits are the leaders in the poll. 75% of the people said that this is an area where the staff needs to improve the most. What's interesting to me about that one, about safe password habits, is that oftentimes it's leadership that is the place where the foot dragging happens on safe password habits, because people really do find complex passwords to be encumbering, and changing passwords regularly to be really challenging, particularly if you've already required that they be complex. Then to turn around and say every 90 days we'd like you to change them. And so it's the leadership that says we just don't want to do that. So that's just an interesting fact. So I don't know if 75% of people saying that that's an area they think their users need to improve upon. That's an interesting poll result. I don't know whether that is because if people are including organizational leadership in that or not, but I wouldn't be surprised. The healthy skepticism of potential social engineering attacks. This is a tricky thing, and this is a place where training is important. But I've always appreciated when I've been on a help desk call or something, and someone says, you know, can you please call so-and-so and help them with their problem, and I call them, and they're reluctant. They want they want to sort of confirm I am who I say I am before they just start getting into the situation with me, and I appreciate that because that shows a healthy skepticism of potential social engineering attacks. And I'm always sort of a little part. It's nice when I can walk into an organization and say I need to go to your server room because I'm from community IT, and they've never seen me before, and they just promptly walk me back there because it saves me time. I can get to my job sooner, and in fact, I am from community IT. But there's a part of me that's like, you should not be doing this. Do not let me in unless you know who I am.
And this really comes down to training and security culture in your organization that we talked about at the beginning of helping your users get into good habits. And so that's why I keep coming back to training and the organization, that this must come from the top down. You have to be involved in this, and it's not something that you just put in the employee handbook and then forget about. They see it once on training day. You must continuously revisit these things, and things change, and we have to keep up with this. So yeah. I'm going to take a couple questions.
Or should we?
Let's wrap up the presentation.
Okay. All right, so unfortunately we have to skip the IT security stories. We're always happy to share them with you, though, if you're interested. Yeah. All right, pass this over to Roshni.
Okay, so the next webinar we have coming up is on August 29th on Office 365. So please join us for that. And finally, next slide. Please do connect with us online and provide us feedback in the survey, which you'll get afterwards. We're going to move over to questions right now, and if you all do need to go, feel free to. But if you have some time, Steve and Mark will respond to some of the questions that we've gotten. One of the first questions that we got was, which mail server do you recommend since Outlook is not the best choice? Our organization uses Gmail.
Well, I want to clarify, I think what we meant by that. We were saying that Outlook is not the place that you want your users or yourself to be investing time in terms of spam filtering. So Outlook is a fine email client. I use it all the time. There are people who find it too complicated and cluttered, and that's fine. But Outlook, it is a good email client. It has some spam filtering functionality. It has a junk email folder. You can set up rules that say, if it meets these certain characteristics of spam, please drop it in my junk email folder, and so on. You can set those up in the options, configurations of Outlook. We would just sort of encourage our users just to not do that. Turn all that functionality off and focus your spam filtering on a hosted spam filtering solution. Again, Community IT uses McAfee's software as a service solution. It works okay. MS Logic is another name for it. But and Postini used to be the one that everybody used until Google bought it and eventually turned the service off, or is turning the service off now. But there are lots of other ones, and there are lots of other ones that are very good. But that's where you should be focusing your spam filtering efforts, not Outlook.
Okay, the next question we got was, why does changing your password make any difference if they are already complex?
Good question. Go ahead. That's actually frequently debated. I think that the big reason is that because if someone gets a hold of that password, you're out of luck. And so, and that really, I think, comes down to as much the social engineering aspect of it, where if someone can talk you out of your password or you leave it on the sticky note, as long as that password's valid and you don't know that it's missing or that someone has access. And so by enforcing frequent change, that just pulls out one possible vector.
There's a technical answer to it also. That any password is, in fact, susceptible to a brute force attack where someone's just constantly trying different variations of passwords until they get the one that unlocks your particular key. You know, if you want to your particular lock, they keep trying different keys until they get the one that works. So enforcing a password change sort of mitigates that risk. But I think that Mark's talking about just how passwords grow stale. 90 days may not seem like the right number to you if you're sort of resistant to this idea. But certainly you can imagine, and I know of clients where the executive director's password has not changed in 10 years. And by that time, a number of different people know that password. And some of those people no longer even work at the organization. And you can just sort of see where this is going. So changing the password frequently is a way to mitigate that risk.
Another related question is, can you set some of the password and screensaver policies on laptops that are not part of the network in a way that a user can't turn them off?
Group policies are designed to be sort of above the level of the user choice. They are also designed to be able to be deployed on specific groups of machines. Sometimes the structures in Active Directory, which is a term for the way Windows organizes, or Microsoft organizes computer accounts and user accounts, sometimes that is tricky and complicated. But yes, the short answer is yes. I'll also add that until recently, well, not that recent anymore, but for a while there was only sort of allowed to be one password policy for the entire quote-unquote domain. But now actually you can actually have different password policies for different groups. So it would be possible, for example, if this is something that made sense operationally, to say finance and HR is going to have to suck it up and have really hard password requirements that are 10 characters long and change every 5 days. I'm exaggerating for effect. But you could do that and have a different password policy that's a little bit easier for other people. That is something that's new with Windows 2008, and so I'm exposing how I've been doing this for long enough that 2008 doesn't seem like it's that long ago, but of course it is.
Okay, the next question is, my building's internet goes through a sonic wall, I think, firewall, which I don't have admin access to. Should we also have firewalls enabled on our individual computers for when we're on different networks? Is FortiGate for that situation too?
So the FortiGate would replace would be in place of that sonic wall. It sounds like you have a somewhat complicated situation there where someone else is managing your network firewall function. And if they're doing a good job of it, I don't know that you necessarily need to be so concerned about host-level firewalls when you're in that network. Certainly you want any laptop that leaves that network out in a coffee shop or something, you want that laptop's host-level firewall to be on and ready for action. Within your network, I think the answer is it depends. It'd be nice to know more about what kind of firewall policies are on that sonic wall that you don't have control over. Sonic wall is a good firewall maker comparable to FortiGate. So there's nothing wrong with the sonic wall per se, but since you don't have admin access, you don't necessarily know how. You might have to ask what policies are in place.
Okay, another question. We have Microsoft Security Essentials with daily updates and scans on our 17 or so laptops. I was advised to transition to AVG free. Is this terrible? Do we need an enterprise solution for security or just convenience? We've never had a virus or a malware problem to my knowledge.
Generally speaking, our recommendation is to go with one of the paid solutions that's a little bit more robust. And you raised that interesting point of cost. We advocate systems that are managed, particularly managed from outside of your network, so that regardless of where that computer is, it's getting updates.
There's another issue that you raised with your question, though, and for 17 computers, having centralized management would be very beneficial. There's no question that I'm going to guess that of your 17 computers right now, that if you went door to door on each computer, you'd find that some of them are not fully up to date with their definitions, and you probably don't have any way of knowing that with your current system. A different concern, but one that's not trivial, is that both of the solutions you mentioned, Security Essentials and AVG Free, I'm not sure about Security Essentials anymore, but AVG Free certainly, have end-user license agreements that do not allow their use in organizational settings. They're for sort of home use. So you're would be in violation of the end-user license agreement, and so that's something that you want to avoid being in. If you're from a nonprofit, and I say that because I know Community IT works with nonprofits mostly, and so you may be a nonprofit organization. Security Essentials may allow for nonprofit use up to a certain number. It may be only 10, though. This is all off the top of my head, so there'd be further investigation of that needs to happen. But the Security Essentials is what I run on my home computer, which is allowed, and I don't need to have centralized management. It's just my home computer, and I am responsible for monitoring it. So I think it's a fine solution, but it does not provide centralized management in the free version, and you do need that for 17 computers.
A related question is, which security software do you recommend? I currently use Symantec Endpoint Protection. What are your thoughts on this product?
Symantec Endpoint Protection has been one of the standards for many years, and we've had great success with it. Community IT has transitioned our users to Viper Antivirus, which is also phenomenally effective. It's as long as you're going, really, I would say, with one of the major companies with a reputable company and it's being consistently patched, the software is being upgraded and updated, and the definitions are being updated regularly, that is, I would argue, far more important. That's the first level.
Than which particular one you choose?
Yeah.
I would agree with that. Semantic endpoint protection is available from TechSoup to nonprofits at a very good price. It is not a cloud-based service, so when laptops go off-site, you're not as clear on what their definition status is. So that's a weakness of it compared to the Viper service that we offer through our cloud. Viper also, because we're managing it for our clients, we have access to sort of everything in one console window, whereas the semantic endpoint protection, you would have to like log into your semantic endpoint protection server to see what the status of your client computers are. So that's talking about the advantages of the definition. But semantic's been around for a long time. There are people who complain vigorously about it. It seems to make my computer slower, and it takes up so much space. And we've seen those problems, but I've seen those problems with most antivirus solutions. So I'm not sure that that I want to say that it's not a good solution in that regard.
Two other questions related to that. What do you think of Sophos, and TechSoup offers Bitdefender? What's your take on that?
I'm not personally familiar with either product.
Yeah. I've seen and used those, but not enough to sort of have an opinion that I would take any credit on.
Any suggestions for encouraging good password practices for our network of clients accessing our online portal?
Oh, good question.
Is that if there's a way to require, well, I would assume that there is, because I know that I use lots of hosted services, and some of them require very complex passwords. My bank, for example, does, and others, don't care at all. They might warn me that I'm using a very simple password, but they don't force me to make it complex. I would say sort of enforcement in that regard, where you actually have code on your portal that forces passwords to be of a certain complexity and maybe forces them to be changed from time to time. I'm not sure you're going to have much success with the other kind of encouragement of like sending them an email and saying, hey, please practice good password practices. I have really honestly, it's surprising in some ways, and in some ways it's not. Passwords are the biggest blind spot that you see in terms of IT security. People just cannot believe it's that big a deal to have a password that's really short and it includes the name of the organization and whatever, and it is. So
you can't enforce behavior, but you can enforce complexity and turnover. And also, I'm actually a rather large fan of sometimes when you create a password, it'll glow red or green and say this is complex enough or not. But those visual cues, I think, can sometimes guilt users into setting a password that's complex enough.
Okay, and one other person commented about the stories, and if you could share maybe some of the stories for the folks who are still on the call.
Who are still willing to stay this extra time. Sure. Going back to that slide, there's some, or I guess we have paper copies.
We can go back. Simple passwords, domain admin privileges, copyrighted material. Oh, that's the one.
Yeah, so there's a simple password story. This is not one that, this came from one of our colleagues. About 10 years ago, a former client of ours, an NGO, called because their mail server was down. And it turns out they had been blacklisted because their server had been spamming all over the world. So when we checked that out and cleared it up, got things fixed, eventually tracked down that the problem was that the webmaster account that was linked to the SMTP server. Actually, it was not the mail server. It was the web server's SMTP server. But anyway, this is getting into technical weeds. The password was password, and someone apparently had guessed that. and compromise the service. So the shocking thing there was that it wasn't compromised. Nowadays, I think if you made your password, you would have a compromised server, I would say, within a week, because I think there's just that many bots that are out there going around constantly trying to identify those kinds of weaknesses.
Well, and one that I've seen on a couple of occasions is where the default administrator password on the router or on the Wi-Fi devices, and I'm not talking about Wi-Fi access for the connection, but the actual administrator to get in to make changes is left at the default. And that's a very common issue, especially in home users, but also in the business environment.
Right. So you set up your router, and it's working, and you walk away from it, but you never actually change the password. So it, it still says, whatever the default password was. And make no mistake, the people who are out there hacking or writing the programs that run the bots that do the hacking know what all of those default passwords are and include those in their program.
It takes 2 seconds on Google to find out. We have to do it for legitimate reasons.
A virus impact story. We have a fairly large local community service client that for years was having virus problems, and we were probably rebuilding one workstation a week. When they finally hired an in-house IT person. They continue to work with us, but they have someone, it's sort of that ownership idea that Mark was talking about earlier, someone who sort of could say, this is crazy. We need to do something about this. So they switched to Community IT's Viper cloud service for the antivirus program, so that they finally had someone checking literally every day on the logs to make sure that all the different clients were being kept up to date. And they also used and this is where I talked about how internet content filtering is not just about blocking access to hate speech sites or adult materials, but also they had a FortiGate on their network, and the FortiGate they enabled all of the was more than made up for. Should we tell some more stories or should we stop? I think we're.
One question was, does Viper offer nonprofit pricing? What is the pricing for Viper?
Viper, if you're a Community IT client, is purchased from Community IT, and I think the price, you might know exactly, is $1 per node per month. There is a margin on that for Community IT. It's not a big margin, because it makes sense to us for our clients to have good antivirus protection, so we're not trying to gouge our clients on their antivirus solution. But we do have a small margin on it. But $1 per node per month, I think, is, like I said just now, I think the return on investment on that, particularly if you're having virus problems now, is well worth it to know that it's sort of managed by your internet, by your systems integrator, by Community IT, that you can sort of not worry about that on a daily basis. If what you have now is semantic endpoint protection, and you have Community IT visiting you every 2 weeks, that's better than nothing. But if it takes 2 weeks for anyone to notice that a desktop has stopped updating its definitions, which just happens sometimes. I mean, manual interventions are needed, but because it's not being monitored by centralized services at Community IT, it's a network-specific application that we don't monitor, then you're more vulnerable. So that's the price on Viper.
Any other final thoughts, takeaways for folks?
just that this is an important topic. It's not, and I guess we'll say something that I do think is important, that that there is sometimes a tendency to focus on the 0.1% part of the problem and not on the 85% part of the problem, that you're putting the bars on your windows when your front door is still unlocked. That kind of thing is something that we hope that people got from this presentation.
Yeah, and my big thing is don't let the discussion end here. Take this where you need to, take it to higher ups, and even if you're not in charge of these decisions, mention it. Be vocal. This is so important to the health of an organization, not only technologically, but for so many other areas. Someone has to take the lead on this. And if you're not sure who that is, maybe it should be you.
Well, thank you so much, Steve and Mark, and thank you all for joining us this afternoon. Please do visit our website at communityit.com to check out blog posts on this topic and other related topics. Have a good afternoon.
Thank you.